Hey, Off-Season After Dark fans, welcome back for episode 18. We have Tim Thomas here to talk about Virginia Tech football. This will be the second episode we've had an ACC guest on. Syracuse was the first one. Remember that was in the summer. But one of our staples here, we talk a lot about coaches, coaching hot seat, things like that. And we have a live one here. Virginia Tech is in the midst of a coaching change. Brent Pry was let go yesterday, and that's when I reached out to Tim, and very looking forward to talking about what went wrong there, what kind of shape Tech is in now and looking for a new coach, and what most of you will want to hear, who some of those guys could be. So, Tim, very glad to have you here. I'm looking forward to this one. Tell the audience a little bit about yourself, where they can find you, and of course, I'll tag all your links in it so they can easily access those.
Yeah, Mike, I appreciate you having me on. Obviously, with the rapidly developing situation in Blacksburg, I'm like Mike said, I'm Tim Thomas. I'm the editor and owner of the Tech Lunch Pail, one of the largest independent publications covering Virginia Tech sports out there. I'm a Tech grad myself back in 2018. We've been in business for just over a decade, and last year we were one of only 3 publications that covered every single Virginia Tech game on site, which included trips to San Francisco for Stanford, Miami, Nashville, Syracuse. So we are on the ground. If you enjoy our work or you enjoy what you hear today, go support us. Go read our stuff at techlunchpail.com, follow our newsletter, and most importantly, the best way you can do it is become a TLP insider. We already got, and we'll talk about some of these names here, but I already got a great piece on some sitting head coaches who I think could be names to consider for Virginia Tech. Some who are reaches that I don't think most likely will end up at Tech, but you have to call, and some guys who I think a little more serious that I would consider. So excited to get into all of that, Mike. We got a great team. We'll be some of our team will be at the press conference tomorrow where the AD, Whit Babcock, will address the media. I'll bet an AD that may not be there for much longer and has already said to not be running the search, which we will get all that mess I know here shortly.
Yeah. That was one of the questions I had was, could this affect the AD's job as well? So that's good to know.
We'll get into that, but it's he's a dead man walking.
Yeah. So before we dive into the new and potential head coach hires, let's do a post-mortem on the Pry era and how we got to where we are. So going back to when he was hired, I'll be the first to say I thought it was a decent hire at the time. He done well as a D coordinator at Penn State. It seemed like a good fit. Let's start off at the time when he was hired. Why was he a good fit, and what did he do right when he was there?
Yeah, Mike, and I think that is a great word to use, fit. That was absolutely the main thing that hire was built around after the Justin Fuente era where, I think Fuente showed he's a better coach than Pry. If you look at their 2 tenures, he's a better head coach. But Fuente was a bad fit in the region, at Virginia Tech, on the recruiting front, and a lot of things. And so Brent Pry was brought in as a much better fit. He was a GA under Frank Beamer in the mid-'90s when Virginia Tech began their ascendance to the heights of college football's national powers. And so it was turn back the clock a little bit and get back to the roots, but also try to do it in a modern way by bringing a guy who had worked under James Franklin for a long time, had helped elevate Penn State into a perennial top 10 program, had been a big-time recruiter in Virginia, knowing that part of what needed to be done was fix recruiting relationships in the state and in the region, especially after the end of the Fuente era, where those relationships were in a bad place. They were in a very bad place at that point. And so if there's one of the few things I think you look back on the Pry era as a positive is that I think Virginia Tech is in a much better spot with those relationships in Virginia and in the Mid-Atlantic as a whole, in the recruiting footprint. That was a used a ton throughout. Those recruit the footprint. And I think that was one thing that was a success in terms of rebuilding those relationships. Though the past recruiting cycle was kind of a step back as the tenure wore on. There were signs of growth earlier on. The first couple of years, classes got better and better in terms of starting to land 2 or 3 of the top 10 in-state guys, which you'd hope to do, but then that even faded. And look, I think Pry was a good guy. He was a nice guy. I think he represented Virginia Tech well in terms of the character and the personality and just the culture fit. But at the end of the day, you got to win football games. You got to be a good head coach. Brent Pry was just not a good head coach. He's a very talented defensive mind. I think anybody in the industry agrees with that. He's a good guy, but he just wasn't a good head coach at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think that's well said. He, for whatever reason, we see it a lot where guys are outstanding coordinators, assistant coaches, and then they're just not capable of being that CEO who oversees the program. And it looks like that was the case with him.
Yeah, and I would almost say he was, to an extent, he was better at the CEO than the head coach on Saturdays. That was part of the issue because you look at some of the mistakes that were made, the in-game tactical head coaching errors that were made. I think back to Miami last year. People remember the Hail Mary and the controversial call, but they should have been kicking a field goal late because with about 40 seconds to go in that game, Brent Pry, frustrated they didn't get a first down, calls a timeout before a field goal attempt. They could have taken the clock down to about 5 seconds and gone to halftime. He calls a timeout out of frustration, and they kick the field goal. They make it, but then Miami has a chance to get the ball back. They squib it, oddly enough. Miami returns it near midfield, about 20 seconds or so left at this point. A couple plays from Cam Ward, knowing how good Cam Ward was, and they're in field goal range. They get a field goal, and instead of having a field goal be able to tie or win the game when they're driving down the field at the end and have to go for that Hail Mary, they have to go get a touchdown. So, and that Hail Mary was like a 30, 40-yard pass. Like they were on the edge they were in field goal range for John Love, who may be despite being on a team that could easily end up being 2-10, 1-11 this year, could win the Lou Grosso Award. As crazy as that seems, he's actually a kicker. And so that's a great example. Or against Vanderbilt, they were, terrible first half, but they were making a run, and then they have double numbers on a punt return. That brings Vanderbilt 5 yards closer. They bring out the field goal unit. They make a field goal. That dampers kind of the first surge that Tech made. Tech makes another surge to force overtime. But if that surge doesn't, if they don't make that mistake, they had all the momentum. They might have just stormed right back through Vanderbilt and taken that win. And in a moment that kind of began the downfall of, this team that had such high expectations after a strong finish, the 2023, might be in trouble here. This may not be what we thought.
And today, in going over his career, I looked back at last season for them, 6-7 losing record. They did make a bowl game. They didn't lose to any bad teams though. All of their losses were to quality teams last year. So,
that doesn't
get it done. That doesn't cut it. But
and that is the reality. Is they lost some good teams, but they just never. Their best win probably under Pry was against mediocre Boston College teams. It's probably the best team they beat. They beat Tulane in a bowl game, but that Tulane team had so many. Willie Fritz had just left. So a ton of players had portal and were not playing in that game either. And then to go 6-7 with 5 guys who would be drafted on that roster, including one guy who was competing for the national sack lead, Bashal Tuden, who was a great running back. Like I said, Antoine Bowryland on the edge. Like there were stars on that team, and they only go 6-7. And there were some when they were at Syracuse, a good Syracuse, they were dominating that game, and then they just adversity hit and they completely collapsed, and Syracuse all of a sudden stormed back. Eventually goes overtime, and Syracuse wins on a day where the offense was going good without the starting quarterback and running back, and the defense imploded. And it's like that's a head scratcher. So it was just at the end of the day, it comes out. We all know it. It's wins and losses. And when you're 16-24 at Virginia Tech, 10-21 against Power 4 competition, 1-12 in one-score games, you lose 3 times to Group of 5 opponents, including twice to Old Dominion. Obviously, that doesn't. And look, I think Pride could have made it to October if they would have beat Old Dominion. But when you're down 28-0 at home at halftime to Old Dominion, the boos are echoing. You have fire Pride chants. But this is a proud program in Blacksburg, and
Yeah.
you just can't go forward at that point. And that's why I think we got to this breaking point now rather than maybe in a few weeks.
Yesterday, when say once the final whistle goes, once the game was done, was the thought in your mind this is going to happen tomorrow, or did you think they'd give him a couple more weeks?
I think the thought in my mind was twofold. One,
Okay.
this needed to happen. It was clear that
Right.
team looked like they checked out or quit. They can deny it all they want. They looked checked out or quit in that first half.
They did.
They got together a little bit in the second half, but clearly things were not right at that point. And you can't lose to Old Dominion like that. It was clear. I think the Vanderbilt game was when it really became clear he was a dead man walking, that this was not salvageable.
Yeah.
It was just a matter of when, not if. The ODU game was, it has to be now, not a when, question mark anymore. But the question was, on the other side, I wasn't sure if they would actually be able to pull it off in terms of making the move now. Because you have an athletic director who is now 0 for 2 at Virginia Tech with his football hires, 0 for 3 overall in his career. One of his first hires currently in the United States Senate, which I think says all you need to know, with Tommy Tuberville when he hired him at Cincinnati.
At Cincinnati,
Yep. The worst hire Cincinnati's had in the past 15, 20 years in football.
Did he not hire Butch Jones when he was at Cincinnati? I was curious about that.
No, he was the AD for about 3 or 4 years. I think Butch may have been on the front end of that and then replaced him with Tuberville, if I'm getting my timelines right. But yeah, you had that with Witt. And look, Witt had a lot of success early in his tenure, but some things have declined. There was men's basketball, just poor funding that caused their roster to be very bad, and shot him in the foot from the get-go. In NIL last year. And Witt Babcock rightly said, hey, they have a deficit compared to what Virginia Tech wants to be in a Board of Visitors meeting back in August. But I think that was also the nail in the coffin as well for him, because why wasn't that call sooner? Why wasn't it a couple years ago? Why he's right now.
Fair.
He's right now, but it feels very desperate now. And I do think Virginia Tech is going to get those resources. But the question, I talked with a high-level donor, someone who's been very involved in athletics in terms of a donor and other roles within the university as a non-employee before. And he said it well to me. He said they need to give the $50 million more, basically, a year. But are they going to give it to the current leadership? And so this was always a matter of when, not if. It's also notable that in the announcement yesterday, Tech's president Tim Sands was the one who was quoted, not Witt Babcock. And my colleague over at Sideline, Andy Bitter, reported that they're going to go by a committee. They're going to assemble a committee to hire the next head coach. Witt Babcock, the current athletic director, will not be the guy running that committee. I'm not sure if he will be on it at all.
Yeah, I feel like just as many things could go wrong using a committee instead of one guy, but that tells us the faith they have in him to make that decision too.
Yeah, and the thing is, they knew that too in the offseason. Like this didn't suddenly come to reality of Brent Pry not being on a warm seat and Witt Babcock not being the guy to make that hire, which just shows even more why do you not make that move back in April or May with Witt Babcock? They had the big Metallica concert that I think has been well publicized, and during the offseason would have been a perfect send-off type moment at that, and get the next AD in, give him time to assemble his team before making this move. Now, at some point, there's going to be an AD search. And you're trying to attract head coaches who are also going to be like, well, who's the AD that's hiring me? Or who's the AD I'm going to be working with? Because they're not going to be the one that probably, at least, when do they come into the picture? They may not be the ones chiefly hiring the guy, which agents are certainly going to question as we get into this search.
And you would say the logic would tell you hire the AD first and have him hire the coach. But because of timelines here, we probably can't do that. You can't hire an AD that quick, and you can't wait to hire a coach because then you're going to get leftovers.
Yeah, it's just this is just bad process on so many levels by so many people at this point. And this could have happened back in April, May. This wasn't like some new
thing. The
thing.
Same thing happened in Mississippi State a couple of years ago. They promoted Zach Arnett. It lasted a year. So hopefully that doesn't happen to you guys.
Yeah. And I think about, sometimes it works, crazy things happen. I think about Miami somehow pulled off poaching Radakovich from Clemson as their AD and then Cristobal from Oregon all at once. Sometimes you get really darn lucky. But then again, Miami has money that Virginia Tech does not have in terms of the mega donors like John Ruiz, who basically sets up a shell company to fund NIL, it seems like.
Okay.
Or at least a life wallet. I don't know exactly what they do, but it's good for funding NIL.
And with Mario there, you had a guy who was very successful somewhere else, had a good program, and chose to leave to go to his alma mater, which is a trend we'll be talking about later on in one of the candidates for this job.
We will definitely get there.
So for me, I was going to say one thing for me, in writing about the coaching carousel almost year round, is my focus. It hit me last year when they lost to Duke. That was their third loss in a row, and you knew you had to beat Virginia to go to a bowl game. And my thought was, Virginia was bad, but even so, you're going to go 6-6, and then who knows in the bowl game, which they lost to my home state Gophers. But I said, whether they're 7-6, 6-7, he's going to be on the hot seat going into next year. It's like it wasn't looking. It was no matter, even if they win the last two, things are going to be rough to start next year. And especially you looked ahead at that schedule, it's like, oh, those are two tough games. And we didn't even think of that losing to ODU would be in the picture.
I don't think anyone did. And that wasn't accounting for the fact you looked down that ACC schedule and you had Miami. You would, I don't think anyone thought Florida State would be this good, but you thought Florida State would probably be at least respectable and bounce back. Or you at least hope. You have Georgia Tech, who look very tough. You have Louisville.
Your 3 games to start November is the biggest gauntlet in the ACC this year. Louisville, Miami, Florida State. That's fair right there.
I mean, that just might be the nail in the coffin of this of what is a lost season for Virginia Tech, a Virginia Tech team that's just trying to scrape out a couple wins.
Let's transition to the candidates now. Want to jump into that? Which is the segue I have here for that was, we talked about the rest of the season. Say they go on a heater and they somehow scrape and can go to a bowl game or look good. Do you think Montgomery would be in play to get the job full-time? Is there any path to that happening?
I guess it's possible. And part of that's because you're probably looking for an AD and whatnot. And if the job just doesn't prove that attractive out there, do you give Montgomery a very short-term deal to try to sort it out? If your alignment's still a complete mess, I mean, that's possible. I do think
Montgomery could be a way to save money. It could be a way to avoid a buyout if you're worried about that in the long run.
Yeah, but that's I think there's got to be some people who got to have the willingness to spend money at Virginia Tech, which that's part of why we're here at this point. But I think going with Montgomery makes it a little less likely, as odd as that seems, compared to if they would have promoted J.C. Price to the interim role, who they did when Fuente got fired and did those couple games. Just because I think J.C. Price, is kind of like what we saw with Brent Key, for example. Price is a former Virginia Tech defensive tackle. There's that kind of appeal and could be a bridge guy in that situation a little more, or at least a little more likely if he went on a tear. Montgomery just doesn't have that same connection with some of those people. I don't think Price is going to be a factor at all in this search either. So if they go on a heater, sure, maybe Montgomery has a chance, but I think it could be blood.
And he was a bad head coach before. I mean, he at Tulsa, his overall winning record was 43-53 there, but his first 2 years were his 2 best years when he had the Todd Graham and Bill Blankenship recruited players.
Yeah, which I think if I'm not mistaken, one of those 2 years was 2015, which
that was his first year there. They went to the Independence Bowl.
Yep. Which is a very full circle moment for Montgomery being the interim head coach at Tech now after he was the last head coach to face Frank Beamer.
That's right.
A weirdly full circle moment, but I would be very surprised if Philip Montgomery, unless they somehow went like 9-0, something absurd. It would
that'd be wild.
That's not happening. That's not happening. They might
wait if that happens. They're a playoff team because you'd win the conference then.
At that point you have to. But they may win 3 games at most at this point. I mean, they should be Wofford. I mean,
You
who knows at this
would
point?
hope so.
But I mean, outside of Wofford, they're going to be favored against Wake Forest at home, and that's
You could beat
probably
Wake. Wake is not looking great. Then
Jake
I
Dicker's
mean,
got a massive rebuild, but they're not going to be favored at
yeah.
UVA with the way UVA is
Cal at
looking.
home. I don't know that Cal is looking better than we thought they would too.
Yeah,
They might not be
Cal's.
favored
I
in that
mean,
game. Yeah.
I don't know why Cal wouldn't be today. I
Yeah.
mean, it's good luck in 2 weeks at NC State in a night game in Raleigh. I
It's gonna be
mean,
tough. Yeah.
that's just. I mean, just I think some Tech fans would just prefer these games start getting put at noon or something at this
Yeah.
point.
At,
I mean, shoot,
at
that's
Virginia
a
looks like at Virginia's a coin flip, probably.
at least. I mean, I think I'd absolutely favor Virginia today at home. They're going to be sensing blood in the water.
Is that game
they
up?
may already be. Tony Elliott may already have a bowl game secured and his job safe for next year. They're going to be sensing blood in the water, and Elliott's going to be sensing an opportunity to really buy himself some time by facing a Virginia Tech, a beleaguered Virginia Tech at that point. I tell you this: if Elliott's like 5-6 or 6-5 going into that game, and they lose to that whatever carcass of a Virginia Tech team this is, he might be in trouble. If he's things could pivot quickly in Charlottesville at that point, because this is golden of opportunity for UVA to beat Tech potentially as they've had in a long time, just because of where Tech is at this point.
I think that's accurate. Yeah. So let's, both you and I have written lists in the last 36 hours. Do you want to, we can dissect and talk about each other's, but do you want to tell the audience yours first, or should I tell them my 5 first?
Well, I will mention with this list, I think both our list, there's some fans, Tech fans, need to get their expectations in check. This is a 30 to 45 range job at this point. In terms of the college football sphere. There are questions about the funding that I think Tech is going to have to put resounding public answers on to help with that. The fan support's great and all, and that will certainly help. And everything, there's a lot of things that are better than UCLA, which is on the market. But UCLA has the Big Ten and the TV revenue that comes with that, and a lot more, and something called conference security in this era. So,
and when you said that when you said that 35 to 45 range, it dawned on me with the emergence of the SEC and Big Ten. Tech is one of those schools that dropped on that list a little bit because you now have lesser Big Ten and SEC programs that leapfrog them in desirability only because of their conference affiliation.
Yeah, and the state that we're at this point. So people are going to say Matt Campbell of Iowa State because he's very successful there, all that, and he's been linked in the past. This ain't 2016 when Tech was looking to replace Frank Beamer. This is not that at all. Just roll out those names. Rule out if you hear a sitting Power 4 head coach, you can rule out pretty much all of them except one name, who I don't think is going to end up at Virginia Tech. But you have to bring him up.
The Gamecock alumni in me doesn't want to lose him.
But it's but it's the name that I think everybody knows, and it's Shane Beamer, who is certainly going to get a call.
I'll say I want him to stay in Columbia. I hope he doesn't leave. But if you're Tech, you have to make him say no. You have to approach him.
Yes. And you might have to. You're really gonna have to bump up that budget because he's already making over $8 million. But
and his assistants are well paid too. His assistants are making good money too.
And I think there's someone who can, get the budgets all up 60% or something in terms of staffing and what Shane Beamer would be able to make and his staff would be able to make. I think Shane Beamer's the guy who could get Tech donors to be like, okay, this is a desperate moment. Let's bring in the legend's son and who's now won in the SEC at a high level, who's pulled off big upsets at South Carolina. Whether that happens, I will add this anecdote from back in 2020 when Virginia Tech it looked like Justin Fuente was about to get fired, but Tech didn't. There were donors at that time who pushed for Shane Beamer. There were threats made to the athletic director of the pulling of funds, of cars that were supplied to the football program at that time for Shane Beamer. Clearly, Whit Babcock was able to stave that off at that time, and this is Shane Beamer before he became right before he became South Carolina's head coach. Tech stuck with Fuente, rebuilt the war chest, and then hired Pry after firing Fuente. And so there's clearly donors who will certainly pull for Beamer anyway, even regardless of the common sense it now is, to give him a call and see if you can make a run at him.
And I've heard from credible people when Shane left Oklahoma to go to South Carolina, had he stayed one more year, he would have got the Oklahoma job if he would have still been there at the time. So, that tells you how well he was liked up. And so, at the time, it wasn't wild to see him. It wouldn't have been crazy to see him go to Vatek at the time, is what I'm trying to say there. Yeah.
Which, what's interesting about that, I'm glad you mentioned that, because Oklahoma's obviously a way better job in South Carolina or Virginia Tech. It's probably a top 10 job in sport.
Yep.
It's looking good for Venables this year so far. Very early, but it's looking good.
Yeah.
If Oklahoma implodes, though, it would be unexpected. But if they were to implode and Venables were to get canned, Shane Beamer's probably a top contender for that job.
That's the one I'm more worried about him going to Oklahoma than I am Vatek.
Yeah, that would be the much more likely thing. Like I said, I think congrats to his agent. I think we can go ahead and congratulate his agent. But
12 of the 16 head coaches in the SEC have the same agent, by the way. So,
is he a Jimmy Sexton guy?
Yes,
he's a Jimmy. Of course, he's a Jimmy Sexton guy. Congrats to Jimmy Sexton again.
I'm almost positive he is. Yeah.
I mean, wouldn't it be shocking? I mean, that's just the business nowadays. But yeah, I would be very surprised if Shane Beamer ended up at Virginia Tech, but you absolutely have to make that run. So I think we get that one out.
I Googled it. It is Jimmy Sexton. I Googled it. Yeah.
Yep. Oh, Jimmy Sexton. You got to love it. But yeah, you have to make a run. I would be surprised if he's the next Virginia Tech head coach at that point. I think that ship has sailed. But
how much? I was curious, and I saw Pry's buyout was in the $6 million range. What was his salary for this year?
It was around $4.5 million. Like, he wasn't paid that highly, but then again, you didn't have to. There was no reason to pay him that highly.
Shane Beamer's 8.15 this year at South Carolina. So you're gonna have to double.
Yeah, he may have been around 5, but either way, it's a significant jump. But I know there'll be obviously plenty of names to ping up back and forth. So I can get into my list, and there'll be other names that I'll put out there in terms of guys that make sense in terms of coordinators. I will say I do think that Virginia Tech is more likely to go with a sitting head coach.
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
I think the lack of head coaching experience for Pry, I think, showed. And I think now, whether that's fair or not, if the best candidate hasn't been a head coach before, you take the best candidate. But I don't know if the stomach is there. We'll see. We'll have to get into some coordinators later on as we go through this list. But if I'm looking at this list, obviously, and you're looking at the G5 ranks, John Summerall is going to be on everybody's list. He's been excellent at Troy. He's been excellent at Tulane. He's worked in big time programs. Another guy you just have to contact. Do I think he would take Virginia Tech? I don't think so. I think he is waiting for the SEC. And if you look at what he's done in both, and he's in a good spot at Tulane. He's in a well-supported program, a G5 program relative to expectations. He can kind of chill there. And he's going to probably, if Florida opens, he'll certainly be a top contender there. If Arkansas were to open, he'd certainly be a top contender there. I've seen people talk about what if Ole Miss opens because Lane Kiffin goes to another job. He would certainly be a contender there. If Mark Stoops decides to hang it up, he's, you mentioned me, or I didn't realize
Kentucky's dog. He'd get the Kentucky job if he wanted it.
Yeah, he would have. They would have the private jet on the tarmac at in New Orleans Airport with a helicopter on Tulane's campus, saying you can just get on that blank check, sign it, put in whatever number you want on it. Come to Lexington. So yeah, I think he has his sights on coaching the SEC. So you make that call. If you can pull that off, it's a home run, no doubt. Home run higher. Do I think it's going to happen? No, but he's the guy you have to call. He's the guy you absolutely have to call and see. North Carolina did that last cycle and ended up with Bill Belichick. So and it seemed like
one guy. Yeah, I didn't put this guy in my top 5 list, but I wanted to ask you a hot name now. We're seeing current head coach Alex Golish. What do you think about his viability?
I think he's going to be a name absolutely that'll circulate in this.
Yeah,
It's impressive what he's done in year 3.
it is.
7-6 in the first 2 years at South Florida, but they hadn't made a bowl game since 2018. So
People
it clear.
people don't realize how bad they were under Jeff Scott. They
Yeah.
were absolutely awful.
It was terrible.
Yeah.
It was terrible. Bright offensive mind comes from that Josh Heupel tree,
Yeah.
which Josh Heupel we've seen give plenty of great SEC defensive minds fits. The recruiting's pretty good. Maybe not spectacular, but he's a solid recruiter, innovative offensive guy, and has pulled off big wins. Beating Boise, beating Florida in the Swamp, which I think is also a perk. But I think the other side, and you have time to watch play out, is he's still only 7-6 his first 2 seasons. So can he elevate in year 3? Can he sustain this? If he can't, I think you'll see things cool off. But on the other side, Golish's name is also going to start to heat up around SEC jobs too, because he worked for Heupel, because of some of those connections he has to that SEC footprint, and like I said, being in the state of Florida too. He could be a name that pops up at Florida as well, at Arkansas, at name your XYZ opening in the SEC, and he's going to be a name like too. I don't think he has the same pull as Summerall at this point.
No.
But I think he's definitely a guy who could be in play for Virginia Tech. But he also could be, USF resource-wise has figured things out over the past few years too. They're building an on-campus stadium. He could be a guy that's just content to wait things out a little bit and wait for a bigger job too.
I could also, being a younger offensive-minded guy, looking the part, I could see UCLA taking a shot at Golish too.
They could take a swing. I don't think it'll be, but I could see them taking a swing at him. You get those now you got to figure out where you're getting the offensive lineman from, but you get a guy with an exciting offense, across town from Lincoln Riley. That makes sense. That would make sense there too. But I think he's definitely a guy that if you're Virginia Tech, you definitely need to call him and consider him.
So you said Beamer would be your first call, Summerall second. Who's your third call?
Well, then we really get into this kind of mold of guys.
It gets way more interesting after those
two. I'll tell you this, though. I think I would have a clear third call / he might be even in that Summerall tier. And this may seem a little crazy, and there are going to be some Florida fans watching this, maybe yelling at their screen. I think they were a little too harsh on this guy, Dan Mullen. I am. He's good at Mississippi State. He was really good at Mississippi State. And if you look at he was at Florida for 4 years, 2019 to 2021, 3 full cycle recruiting classes he signed. All 3 by 24/7 Sports were in the top 12. If you look at his record, he won 10 plus games each of his first 2 years. His third year was COVID, when it was an all SEC shortened schedule. They went 8-2 in the regular season, played for the SEC championship, finished 8-4.
They won the division one of those years,
Yeah, they finished top 15 in the rankings all 3 years, all those first 3 years, and then things fell apart in year 4, recruiting and other things. But that was 1 year. That was one bad year, and Florida people lost their minds, and that was that with Mullen. And Mullen is a character, he's a personality, but
he is.
Guess what? He's going back out the UNLV. He took a few years in the media. He went out the UNLV. He's got a top 65 class at the moment at a UNLV team that is going to be in the Mountain West going forward, and not in this premier what is going to be the premier West Coast G5 conference, the revitalized Pac-12. And he's got a top 65 class, and it's not like he's got 40 commits. He's got 22, which is a decent size, but he's got top 65 class recruiting across the country. Like, Mullen's a better recruiter than people give credit, and this NIL and rev sharing era is probably better for guys who maybe aren't as good recruiters, and the guy can coach football. We saw him win at what is probably sorry Mississippi State fans, but the second worst job in the SEC in Mississippi State would probably generally be considered. There's upside, but it's a bottom tier SEC job. It's tough. And he won big. He had the number 1 team in the country at Mississippi State.
The very first playoff era, they were number 1 in the first rankings.
They were number 1 in the first rankings. I mean, I didn't expect to be as big on Dan Mullen. Now, I do believe there is a significant buyout, but honestly, there's been talk. I think there was a report in the offseason that UNLV couldn't afford the whole contract that they signed with him in the first place.
Yep, I did hear that as well.
So if you can't afford it anyway, maybe you can negotiate a smaller buyout. And I don't know, as weird as this say, I don't know how many SEC schools are going to go out of their way to bring Mullen back into the conference, which kind of creates a weird market. Now, UCLA is probably going to be interested. I'm certain they would be interested in him too. But I think Dan Mullen should be very high on the list, in my opinion.
I think you're right about SEC though. Like he strikes me as ACC or Big 12 is probably his next power job.
Yeah, could be Big 10 too. Yeah. I could see the Big 10. I just don't think it's going to be the SEC, which, by the way, gives you an edge.
UCLA would make sense already being in that part of the country.
Because I would take Dan. I think I would, if I was making a decision, I would go Dan Mullen over Alex Golish. If I was making that,
I would too.
I know there's a lot of people who will disagree with me on that, but he's also only 53 years old. Like, this is not like he's 65. It's not like when North Carolina hired, Mac Brown or Bill Belichick.
The last two. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not like when they hired either of those two. Like, he's still 53. Like, he's got another decade and a half. He might be a guy who retires in his mid-60s and goes back to television because he was pretty good on television. But
he was.
And he's been around the country. He got to do some of that and kind of got to recharge a little bit. I think Dan Mullen makes a ton of sense. And he had to replace a lot of things after Barry Odom left there and did a great job at UNLV, but it's not like he inherited a ton. He inherited a program to realize they could actually win, and Dan Mullen's doing that. I think Dan Mullen should be very high on the list, and I think it's doable. And hey, if it's a big buyout, so be it. You got to spend money nowadays. It's college football in 2025.
Yeah, that's fair.
You might have to take on a little debt. That Virginia Tech athletics department's ran in the green a good amount, so I think they can take on a little debt. For 1 year.
I'll say that on the list of 5 I had 2 Sun Belt head coaches on there. Bob Chesney at JMU and Charles Huff at Southern Miss, who was with the Herd last year and won the conference.
Both made my list.
Those guys would be solid hires.
Yep. Both made my list. I mean, Chesney's a proven winner. He's won everywhere he's been. South Virginia, Assumption, Holy Cross. I mean, he has 4 of the 6 playoff appearances that Holy Cross has ever had. At Assumption, he produced 3 NFL players either coached or recruited at a D2 school. Coach or recruited was there for like 5 years and had 3 NFL players. I mean, that's
wild.
That's insane.
I didn't know that. That's impressive.
Yeah, that's insane. I mean, and he had a good start at JMU in year 1. They'll be able to monitor and see how his team does. But if they do as well as they should in year 2, and they did a good job retaining guys like Barnett at quarterback, Petaway at running back, and Knight as well, all of whom he could pull with them as well, the Blacksburg.
They were my preseason pick to win the East in the Sun Belt. Yeah.
Yep. Like, it's all there for him to do that. And I think Chesney is a very appealing name and is a name that should get a lot of consideration. I will say his high school recruiting leaves a little to be desired. That I think that's a concern. And he's never been in a Power 4 league, and I think that matters a little more than it used to. That might also impact some people around Tech, thinking back to Justin Fuente, because he didn't. Should that? I don't know if that's necessarily fair, but this guy who has, and his base is the Northeast. His base is not necessarily the Mid-Atlantic as much. Being at JMU has definitely helped him expand in that regard. But I think there's some things that are concerns, but I think there's a lot of potential with him, and he's a proven winner. At the end of the day, the guy knows how to win.
Yes.
Charles Huff and Mike, I know you might be able to explain a little more about the Marshall situation, how that all played out. But he went to a bowl game all 4 years at Marshall, won the conference last year, 9+ wins twice, beat Virginia Tech, beat Notre Dame in South Bend, recruited pretty decently. He's imported what he did at Southern Miss, or what he did at Marshall to Southern Miss. He's basically imported that into a Southern Miss program that had been a mess, and they look competent. I mean, they beat App State pretty good. They're 2-1 now, and was able to bring guys like Braylon Braxton and Josh Moden, who could have easily been playing. Could have been playing at Power 4 programs easily, and followed Huff. Which, if they have eligibility, they might end up following Huff to a Power 4 school next year. In reality,
Braxton will be done. I think this is year 6 in college for him. Yeah.
So, but still, I think there's something to be said about what he's been able to do. He's proven he can win. He's coached for Franklin and Saban. He from Maryland, played his college football at Hampton, so he's very familiar with the East Coast as well. And he's known as a good recruiter too. Was at Mississippi State as well with Moorhead briefly.
Yes, yeah, he was.
So I Charles Huff is a name initially I forgot about, and it's like he makes a lot of sense. And like I said, he was on a hot seat because of relationships more than internal athletic department relationships.
Him and the AD just couldn't get along and agree to. The AD
Yeah.
is out of a job since. But my thought, and I some of the old heads here and homers will, that they blame him and whatnot. I blame the AD, and I think some people can get so caught up in the own traditions of their own place. But if you have a coach that's winning the conference title, you give him an extension, even if you have to give him more money than you want to. If you're the AD, you make it work.
Yeah, you have to find a way, and and you might be able, Mike, you might be able to explain more. But I know they had Doc Holliday for so long. That's a program that just I don't think is used to having guys that are really good and looking for the next job.
He was also you had Pruitt for years, Doc for years. Then you had Huff for 4, and now with Gibson. All of those guys except Huff was a West Virginia guy. Pruitt and Doc were Marshall grads. The people here never really get, at least in my experience, they didn't realize he was always the outsider to them, which was bogus, and it was just not allowing.
I mean, especially after the Tudor's biscuits comment he had saying Ohio State players want to come play. I mean, come on. I give him credit for that, and shoot, if he comes out here, I think he'll have to find some good biscuit places out here if he were to be the next head coach in Blacksburg. But because there ain't Tudors, but there's some good spots that I can tell him right now.
Yeah,
but I think he's definitely though a name that should be considered, because I've seen some people say, okay, if you miss on a bunch of guys, I think he should be maybe in that goalish tier, to be honest.
Yes, I think that's fair.
I think that guy is proven himself very well. And I think Chesney falls in that group too. So, I think that's where you look at those head coaches. And then you probably go to a next tier of guys like someone who could be in that tier, like Jason Candle at Toledo.
Yeah. I don't know if he wants to leave. He's been there. You feel like the opportunity to leave would have been there for him if he was ever going to leave.
But I think I remember a couple years ago he interviewed for the Miami offensive coordinator job before that. I think they chose Gaddis. It was either for when they chose Gaddis or when they chose Shannon Dawson. So
it was. I think when they fired Gaddis. I think it was after they fired Gaddis before Dawson got hired. Yeah.
So I think he's got ambitions to get to the Power Four, and just hasn't been able to get that for one reason or another. Tyson Heldon at Western Kentucky. I know a lot of people think if I'm going to mess with a CUSA coach, it's Jamie Chadwell, but I'm a little concerned for all the resource that Liberty has. Kind of disappointing last year. 1-2 start this year. I am raising some concerns about Chadwell, and I think that's their concerns there. But Chadwell's a guy you monitor and see how their season plays out. But I have some concerns. Tyson Elton, though, Western Kentucky is one of the better jobs in that league, but he's been steady, 8-9 wins. I'm concerned he hasn't won a conference title, but he's been consistently good. He's been adaptable.
Went to a bowl game every year.
Yep. Adapt the portal era too, and pretty consistently, pretty much every year wins 8 or 9 games. He's
replacing old coordinators left and right, and just still winning games all the time.
And he's been a cradle of them too. You look at Zach Kitley, who's now the head coach at FAU. Ben Arbuckle, the Oklahoma offensive coordinator. They imported Bailey Zappi. They imported Austin Reed. They're doing it again with Maverick McIver. I think he's a better name but I don't think he's at the higher end of that list though. And I think he could be a guy that looks to get to the American or something like that. If USF opens, I could see him trying to position himself for that job. For example, if Golish leaves, that might be his next move to try to climb the ladder a little more because he may not be in that spot. So I think those are some of the guys. Ryan Silverfield, I know Tom Lloyd, 24/7 Sports, apparently made that case today. It's interesting because they have gotten better. And I don't think, look, you hired a Memphis.
That's where you got Fuente from. I mean, is that going to happen again?
Yeah, I mean, you can't hold that to him, because they're two.
Some people will though. Some people will say that.
And that will probably hurt his chances. And he's won 21 games in the past 2 seasons prior to this year. But he also did it at Memphis, which has the best resources in the American.
Oh, yeah.
And Houston was left the league. Cincinnati was gone. And what's it called? UCF. They had all just left the Big 12 in 23, and then SMU in 24 for the ACC. So, you would hope Memphis would rise. And if you're still going 8-4 at that point, you may that's decent, but you might have to think about a change because you're not reaching what your ceiling could be. And he has to play for a conference championship, which I think is a little concerning. So Silverfield, I'm not as high on. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I mean, I wasn't as big on Heupel because I didn't think he really continued the Scott Frost that well. And then he goes to Tennessee and has been fantastic. So I think Silverfield's worth considering. He's kind of on the edge of my list. I probably would put him on there, but he's probably worth the conversation.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
A guy who didn't make my list, but was in that realm of other guys who would be Jeff Traylor at UTSA. Done a very good job there and has been very consistent.
The thing with Traylor, though, is I just don't think he would fit. And I think, he's such a Texas guy. I think he's a deep South. Honestly, Arkansas. I think if Arkansas opens, if there's a Texas job that opens, like say Dave Aranda, Baylor has a good year and Dave Aranda decides to cash in or something, or Joey McGuire. Well, Joey McGuire is a Texas guy too, so he might be content Texas Tech. Or say Oklahoma State, Mike Gundy opens. I think Jeff Traylor makes a lot of sense at something like that versus, and I think, given that Fuente
he would be another good one. I think we had mentioned Arkansas before. Well, Rhett Lashley's an Arkansas alumni. If he goes to Arkansas, if I'm SMU, I consider Jeff Traylor.
But I will say one thing, and that's a whole nother discussion, is SMU a better job than Arkansas right now? Given the resources.
We've had that talk on our group channel. We've had that talk before. Yeah.
I would probably say it. You have a better path to the playoff and resources because SMU's got some really rich people. Are pretty comparable. I'd say you hold out for a bigger SEC job if you're Rhett Lashley, if that's your ambition.
Yeah. You wonder there though. That's home for him, and it's where he went to school. You wonder if that would. Yeah,
there is the appeal of that, and as we've talked about with Shane Beamer already earlier.
I had another guy on my list I wanted to ask you about because I put the guy on the list, but I haven't seen him anywhere else. So, former Virginia Tech offensive coordinator, former Bowling Green head coach. Scott Loeffler is now the quarterback's coach with the Eagles. I wouldn't have him he wouldn't be my first call, but I think he's down in that group of guys we're talking about now potentially because he was a decent head coach at Bowling Green.
Maybe this is because when I was a student first couple of years at Virginia Tech and Loeffler was the offensive coordinator. I remember being able to predict every time when Tech was running a jet sweep, and I don't consider myself the most brilliant football mind. I don't think he gets a call. He wouldn't be on my list personally. Yeah, I don't. I remember when he got the Bowling Green job. I kind of was like, how did he end up? How long is he going to ride coaching Tom Brady and Tim Tebow? He did some decent stuff at Boston College, but he wasn't very good at Virginia Tech. And I think I don't see him at all being. If it gets to someone like Scott Loeffler, I think you just promote Montgomery or Price, and you have deeper issues at that point because everybody's turning down your job.
The other hat in the ring that's going to come up is Michael Vick. I don't think he gets the job. I wouldn't hire him. No. Some people will think they can replicate what Colorado, UAB are doing. We're hiring the former NFL guys.
Yeah, we've seen how that's gone to UAB. I mean,
absolutely,
that's a complete train wreck.
Yeah.
As soon as that hire was made, you immediately thought, whenever this job opens, it's a possibility. Can I rule out Michael Vick being the next head coach at Virginia Tech? No, I cannot rule that out.
No.
Do I think it'll happen? No. And I don't think this would be. Now, who knows? Let's see how, if Norfolk State finishes the year at 7-3 or something.
Yeah.
It might be a different ball game at that point. But I think there's a big learning curve that Vic is having right now. Compared to, let's say, Dion had when he got into it. And even Eddie George, for example, who's now, made the jump to Bowling Green, but had been in the FCS ranks previously. So I think Vic's
they're having a good Bowling Green start in the season. Well,
yeah, who knows if they do really well? Who knows? Maybe you call up Eddie George. He's the big name.
Absolutely.
Though I don't know if Eddie George really brings, based on his name, the same recruiting that a Dion or Vic would bring in that regard. I just don't think people know Eddie George as well. But yeah, it would not be this. It could. Who knows? Maybe it could work if they pulled it off. But no, I don't think that should be an option that Tech considers at this time. I think Roger Gonzalez of CBS Sports, a sports writer over there, who is a Virginia Tech alum, said that Vic would be interested. Which, shocker.
Of course he would be. Well, yeah.
I mean, but I don't think. I think if this was after next season and Vic had started to show some things, then this would be a different conversation. I think it's too soon.
It is. I would say so.
Struggled mightily to start the season. They got to win a couple weeks ago against the D2 Virginia State, but they've struggled a lot to start the season.
They have.
They have a lot of work to do. There's a lot to learn for him. Now, if this next hire doesn't work out and Vic does decent at Norfolk State, then is doing good at Norfolk State, then I think it quickly becomes a very different story. And it's a very different situation. Just like, Shane Beamer was a lot riskier back in 2020 if they would have made a move then versus now. So, but yeah, I would be very surprised. Michael Vick's not on my list in terms of who I would consider. But at the same time, who's running the search? That's a mystery right now. It's not the AD. It could be there could be, you have donors, other people, you sometimes get weird things can happen when the search structure is a little off balance. So you can't completely rule it out.
I think you're right. Yeah. Like it's one of those it's unlikely, but there's more than a 1% chance it happens.
Or at least more than a 0.1%.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd put it less than 1%, probably like 0.2. But
it's a non-zero. It's a non-zero.
It's a non-zero
happening.
And most of that's because the search is who knows who's running the search because of other factors. The fact that Tech's probably going to make the AD change that's felt inevitable for a while very soon.
Are there any current coordinators who you think could be relatively high on the list or have a legitimate chance at getting the job?
Yeah, well, if I was, and a lot of this is big in part because we don't know who even is running the search, or names I would speculate more than anything else about at this point of, I think you could see that. I think, like I said, they're going to go with someone who has head coach experience, but,
I agree.
But I think like you look at, I know Will Stein's name has been mentioned a ton, the Oregon offensive coordinator. I think it's just too cross country maybe. But like Brian Hartline, Ohio State, great recruiter, little different archetype, but somewhat similar to what they would have done with Pry. I think he's a rising name and could definitely be someone that you hear and would make sense to maybe have a conversation with. Miami offensive coordinator Shannon Dawson. You look at the job he's done down there in Miami.
Done well.
It would be wild to see, given the rivalry, a Miami coordinator be the next head coach at Virginia Tech, but that's the business. One thing that I thought about too when I was kind of prepping a list in terms of looking at coordinator, Glenn Schumann, the Georgia DC.
Yeah, he's also a guy. He might just get an SEC one right away because he's very highly thought of.
Yeah.
One so that an in-conference guy that we had heard mentioned for multiple head coaching jobs over the last 3-4 years. Tony White, who this year is at Florida State. When he was at Nebraska, we heard him mentioned for jobs.
That name just came to mind as you were saying that.
Yeah.
I actually hadn't had him down on my list of guys, and honestly,
I didn't either until it was popping. Yeah,
it makes sense. Now, I think there's some ties to UCLA that may make him a lot more in play there, but. Yeah, he's an interesting name. Blake Baker, the LSU DC, has done a tremendous job. Brian Haynes, both coordinators at Indiana could be appealing given, what Cignetti did, James Madison, and, Brian Haynes and Mike Shanahan. Both of those guys could be names. Like I said, I don't think it's going to be a coordinator. And here, I'll give you this. Here's one kind of wild card coordinator name. I would be very surprised if it was this name, but maybe he's worth a call. The thing is, the timing of actually getting him on campus would be tricky because of his current job. What about Todd Monken? But I don't think it would happen. I don't think it would happen at all. I don't think he's leaving the NFL. But he's been a head coach before and was good at Southern Miss and had been it briefly, I think.
I had heard someone say Jeff Monken would be a decent candidate.
Jeff Monken's interesting because Jeff Monken's a winner. He's a leader of men. There's no denying that. We don't have a great feel for his recruiting ability, but because he's been at Army, and that's such a completely different.
We don't know. Yeah, it's an unknown at this point.
But he's a leader. Yeah. He is definitely a leader of men. The question is, could he run something that isn't the option? Because that's you wouldn't want to run the option. They tried.
This is maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I forget what job it was, but he had said he would be adaptable if he went somewhere else.
I want to say it may have been Nebraska. Even it may have been Nebraska.
Could have been.
But that he was rumored with a lot. I mean, that's a big question with him is, how adaptable and can he execute that too? It's one thing. I think he's absolutely planning on shifting away from the option if he leaves Army.
Yeah.
But
I think it was Boston College when O'Brien got it. I think that's what it was. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think I think that Jeff Monken would definitely be an intriguing name as well. I would be very intrigued if you could tell me that he could pull off a different offense. Jump him way up that list because he is a great head coach. But that's just the lingering question of can he execute running a different offense? But then again, you put and part of that comes down to he would probably need to bring in outside people, maybe outside his traditional tree offensively. That would probably have to be part of it. And I tell you this, it would probably mean one holdover on Tech's current staff, which there are a couple of people I think are strong holdover assistant candidates, but one guy who isn't on that list who could suddenly become one would be the current tight ends coach, Brent Davis, who was a longtime Army offensive coordinator before Monken parted ways with him because he wanted to try to modernize the option at the Army, quickly realized that was not a good idea, and then pivoted. Which is the concern about can he shift away, or is that a Monken issue being able to shift away, or is that an Army issue?
Yeah, it's tough. You don't really know that until you get down into it.
Yep. So, but he's intriguing to me. I think Jeff Monken is very intriguing. Yeah,
it'll be for me. If you would have to ask me right now, who's the next guy going to be? I don't have any faith that I could get the answer right. Who knows?
No.
And you've brought up the good point about we don't know who's running the search and making that decision, which makes it even more difficult.
And even if it was somehow Whit Babcock, which it was never going to be at this point, Whit Babcock was always known for keeping a very tight lip on his searches. Now, depending on once we get that, figure out who the heck is on this committee. Which I don't know when we're going to find out that at this point, or when we're going to hear about that, because Babcock, who's basically a lame duck AD at this point, is the one giving the press conference tomorrow. Not the people are probably going to be much more the president, Tim Sands, or other university leaders who are going to be much more involved. So, which just feels like kind of a waste of time. What else are you going to say? We fired Brent Pry because he was 16-24, but that's a whole nother discussion. Shows kind of the mess of leadership at Virginia Tech, and how they kind of need to get their crap together a little more. And this move, their nimbleness here is a good sign of maybe progress.
Yeah, I would imagine from Babcock tomorrow, you're not going to be hearing much that we don't already know.
No, especially because he's not going to be involved really in the search. Yeah. So what can he even say about the search? So that's a whole. Like I said, I think that says a lot, and I think Virginia Tech needs to realize, okay, you showed some nimbleness now. Now you need to really show it. Now you need to properly figure out a search. If you're moving on from an AD, you need to start honestly running a search while at this point. The search should have been going on for a while. And I will say this. That brings up at this point it's a when Virginia Tech makes an AD change. The one thing that makes Golesh, to go back to Alex Golesh, intriguing link to Tech is because one guy who I think could make sense as an AD target is Michael Kelly, the Navy athletic director. He just got there, but he was at USF for several years. Got the on-campus stadium, had a lot of success, turned around their football program, turned around a men's basketball program that wasn't really existent there. has worked in the ACC offices and the college football playoff offices as a COO of the college football playoff before becoming the USFAD. He would make a lot of sense. So, if you'd say he was the next guy, he could probably pull Goalish. You could see something like that where an AD, if this plays out, gets put in and a couple weeks later pulls a guy he's very familiar with. That's the other thing. Who knows? Depending on where that happens, that could shape this search more than anything.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a variable that with the conflicting timelines of both, we don't know how it's going to, what's going to come first. Yeah, I'm assuming a head coach hire happens first, but you never know.
Yeah, but that's the thing is, how long does Babcock stick around at this point? And that's going to be a part of the challenge with this search, and the coach is considering is the AD, the people that hire you are not going to be right now may not be include the AD you're working for, and we'll decide if you decide in the future if you continue on or not if you're struggling.
I think that's well said. Yeah. So we don't have too much longer to go here, Tim. But any other candidates who you think are worth a mention at this point? People you think would be a fit, or if you don't think they'd be a fit, but they are mentioned, anyone you want to mention, feel free to throw them out there.
Yeah, I mean, Tech fans have brought up John Gruden. Congratulations, John Gruden has made it into another college football coaching cycle just because, he fawned over a box he got from Virginia Tech. Give me a break. No, it's no. Look, who knows? Crazier things have happened in the sport. Never say never.
They have.
But and who knows? It could even work. I mean, he did win a Super Bowl, but no. So
I think that one come into fruition.
I think we've hit on Vic. I don't think it's going to be an internal promotion. No. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm trying to think through if there's any other big names. G.J. Kinney, I know Texas State has been mentioned. I am not terribly convinced.
I like him, but he's also underwhelmed the last year.
Yeah, he's been kind of 8 wins. He's been solid at Texas State. Don't get me wrong. He's been solid, and he's had a high octane offense, but they haven't been necessarily play great defense. He was only the head coach at Incarnate Word for a year. I mean, shoot, if you're going to go that Incarnate Word route, maybe if North Texas has a really good year, Eric Morris, the guy who kind of where Kinney came off of, maybe that would be the better look. But I don't think either of those guys make sense. So I'm not in on the GJ Kinney.
Yeah, and they're also, like we talked about with McGuire and Traylor, they're both deep Texas guys too. Morris and Kinney are. So
it just doesn't. They just don't fit. It's just and I don't think a Texas guy is going to have an appeal either. Because
I'll say one guy, we brought up Huff and Chesney. Is Ricky Ron a guy that if ODU wins the division, which they're going to be?
I think because there's much more ties to Pry and and they just haven't done very good. I think I think the wins he's had.
He was on my hot seat. He was on my hot seat going into the year too. ODU had to win, but it looks like they are going to win some more. We'll see.
Yeah. But I think he could easily, if they go 5-7, Ronnie's gone, and Colin Joseph is going to be a very interesting name on the transfer portal market among quarterbacks for Power 4 options, because that guy is an athlete. I tell you, guy is an athlete. And shoot, you put him in some sort of, option-esque or, quarterback run heavy type scheme, he could thrive at the Power 4.
He'd be very good in a Hugh Freeze system.
Or like a Rich Rod.
Yep. Exactly.
Rich Rod type.
Scott Frost. Scott Frost type stuff.
Yeah. Things like that. Yeah. Spread options. So I think no, I don't see Ronnie. Shoot, honestly, Tech might have a staffer who, if ODU opens and Fontel Mines, the wide receivers coach, who Tech hasn't been. Things obviously have not gone great under Pride, but Mines has been a great recruiter. He's done very well with his room. He's been a great recruiter in the 757 and in Richmond. And I don't think Ronnie's done a great job there. And his roots are in Richmond. so not too far away. And in that on that I-64 corridor, where if you're ODU, you want to get those second tier guys that aren't going Power 4.
Exactly.
I think Fontel Mines will be a name that will come up there a ton if ODU opens. And Mines is a guy as a wide receivers coach who I think he's one of the top one. He might be the one or two guys who, if whoever the next head coach is, will try to keep.
Okay.
Because he's a great recruiter.
That's good to know.
Immediately give value to whoever the new head coach is in those schools. Same thing with J.C. Price, the defensive line coach. And they've been the best recruiters, and their position groups have generally been the best on the team the past couple of years.
Okay. Yeah.
Carries a lot of weight. If you're the best recruiters and your position groups look pretty good, like there's only so much the wide receivers can do when your quarterback's play is inconsistent and your offensive line doesn't have the depth. You made a couple bad hires prior to making what I think is a good hire, but is in such a bad situation that you're playing true.
Wasn't Price a Tech alumni as well?
Yes. So there's
I know he coached at Marshall for years.
Oh yeah. And Mines actually is a UVA alum and has become a weapon tech on their staff. So which is kind of, shows how crazy the sport can be sometimes.
Yeah, that is interesting. I didn't know he was a UVA guy, but cool. We always kind of end the show on just looking in the conference. So ACC right now, what two teams would you pick to go to the conference title? Excuse me.
I think Miami's got to be one of them. And I mean, Clemson was my preseason pick to win the whole darn thing. That looks terrible. I don't think I can go with Clemson at this point. I don't think. I mean, there's a path you have. It's Miami and Georgia Tech. There's a path, by the way. Now Georgia Tech could be. We could be talking them going to Georgia, and it's like, or playing before the Georgia game, being like, they're in the playoff. They could be 11-0 going into that Georgia game. I mean, they play Temple at Wake Forest, Virginia Tech at Duke, who's been a little disappointing to start the season.
They have,
Syracuse at NC State, who I think Dave Doran doesn't get enough credit, and I think I'm not surprised that they're bouncing back some this year.
Super but consistent that might be coach. He's good.
Yeah. At Boston College, Pitt. At NC State, maybe the toughest game they have left. They could go 11-0. It's crazy. Odds they probably slip up, and obviously there's a lot of injury risk with Haynes King. Though then again, some of these games, I tell you, they might be able to just let Haynes throw it, if they can get control of the game. And then if they're up 2 or 3 scores in the fourth quarter, pull them out of there. They got a competent backup in Aaron Philo, who's much more of a passer than Haynes King is. When they didn't play Haynes King last week, not Clemson game, but the game before that, I would be very surprised if Haynes King wasn't I think Haynes King was probably available, and they're like, we have this competent backup. We're playing Gardner Webb. We'll just treat it like an NFL preseason game and not play the starter and let Philo play. Okay. Because he's a very competent backup.
Yeah.
I think, and like I said, Georgia Tech, you look who they avoid. I think, and they have a tiebreaker on Clemson already. Right now, I think it's Georgia Tech and Miami. They don't play Louisville, who I think is the other big contender. SMU's got some things clearly to figure out right now, but they have the upside still. Clemson's at 0-1. I mean, Clemson's could still get there. But I think right now we're headed towards Georgia Tech. I think we're headed towards Georgia Tech, Miami.
Yeah.
So Louisville at Miami, which I think is on a Friday night for some reason, which is terrible. Louisville's at Miami at home against Clemson. They go 1-1. They win at Miami, even if they lose to Clemson. Clemson may pick up another loss. Louisville could have a tiebreaker, and that could be the difference. Especially because Florida State, they don't play Florida State, who's got to play Miami, got to play Clemson.
And the way Florida State started, that Miami Florida State game could be to go to the conference. The winner of that is going to have a huge leg up and go to the conference title game.
Oh yeah, because you look at Florida State. Like I said, all Clemson's one loss away from being completely out of the tiebreaker scenario.
Yeah.
So, and they could win out. Clemson could easily win out, be 10-2, and play and win the ACC championship, and then we're back to Clemson with 7 potential first-round drafts and a national title contender.
Yeah.
But Florida State beats Miami. All right, they got at Clemson, but otherwise it's Pitt, at Stanford, Wake, Virginia Tech, and at NC State in conference play. That's it. That's and with Thomas, Gus Malzahn turning Thomas Castellanos into Nick Marshall 2.0, basically.
Yeah.
But if I had to pick, I would go Miami and Georgia Tech. I think that would be my pick
Yeah,
to reach
I
Charlotte.
probably would too, because I'd give Miami the nod to beat Florida State, even though it is in Tallahassee this year.
Yeah. Which
well, I think it
that
has
is
to be one of those two, and then
that is going to be the biggest Miami Florida State game I can remember in a long time.
in
That is going to
15
be
years probably. Yeah.
huge. I mean, it's going to be a top 8 game.
Yeah, Louisville is good, consistent. They've not looked great in the first couple weeks, though. Like Louisville has looked shaky with some of the things they've done.
Yeah,
and we've seen.
Yeah, like Miller Moss, I know hasn't necessarily maybe set the world on fire. Though I do think Miller Moss is the most talented quarterback they had. I know Tyler Shuck got drafted, but I do think Moss might be.
Yeah,
but there are some concerns. I think they're fair. But
fair.
Isaac Brown is such a dynamite at running back. I mean, it's crazy. The guy, he has, they've played 2 games so far. They had a bye this past week, but he's averaging 115 rushing yards per game on 9 carries per game. Now, Eastern Kentucky, James Madison, but I mean, he's just a home run machine. And I think honestly, that JMU win is going to age well. I think that win,
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
They grinded it out against a JMU team that probably isn't going to get, it's probably going to go to the American champion at this point, the G5 playoff bid with what USF and Tulane have done to start the season.
Mm-hmm.
Memphis in that league too, and others like North Texas beating the crap out of Washington State and whatnot. But JMU's a good team, and so Louisville is interesting. Is definitely interesting, and they have chances to stack up some good wins with Clemson at SMU and at Miami. If you can take 2 of those 3, if they get to, even if they don't make the AC championship, they get to 11-1, which is possible. I'm not sure. I don't think I'd predict that necessarily, but it's definitely possible. They get to 11-1. It could be a very interesting conversation. If
sure
11
is, definitely is.
That doesn't play for the ACC title game. Could be a very fun conversation for the playoff.
Yeah. I'm going to ask 2 more questions before we adjourn for the night. I always ask them with our coaching one. So now that Pry's gone, which ACC coach is on the hottest seat?
I gotta think about that one because, I won't take the lazy answer of Frank Reich, interim coach at Stanford. That feels like that's obviously the lazy answer.
That's lazy man's one.
The thing is, like, Pat Narduzzi, maybe after the way they lost to West Virginia, they kind of threw that game away. Maybe it's Narduzzi, but
and he's been so good, and he's been good there for a long time too, which is tough.
Yeah, and the thing is, they got to play Florida State, Louisville, Notre Dame, Georgia Tech, and Miami. If they don't go to a bowl game, and NC State's on this schedule, I mean, they got the weaker games are at Stanford, at Syracuse, and Boston College. I mean, they finished last year terribly too. Yeah, and then the only other, so maybe it's Narduzzi, maybe it's Tony Elliott, but I mean, UVA is 2-1 right now. They came darn close to beating NC State, but maybe should have won that game. And their remaining schedule is Stanford at home, Florida State, which they'll lose that, at Louisville they'll lose that, then Washington State at home, at North Carolina, at Cal, Wake, at Duke, Virginia Tech. They could get to a bowl game, and unless look, I know there's a lot of money that win that UVA program, but if they get to a bowl game, and that's just progress for Tony Elliott, I think he could. It wouldn't surprise me if he sticks around.
One of my favorite preseason bets was the over on Virginia wins, just looking at that schedule and how much better that roster looked to be.
Yeah. And then the other team, though, which could, if Tony Elliott doesn't get to a bowl game, could help make Tony Elliott that next guy, is Cal. Like, Justin Wilcox seemed like a dead man walking, but he's 3-0. And
they're 3-0.
I tell you this, at San Diego State, they should win. At Boston College, cross-country trip makes that a little more painful. But and Lonergan and company at BC do look feisty. But they go win that, then Duke, North Carolina, at Virginia Tech, UVA, at Louisville, at Stanford, SMU. Could they go like 7-5, 8-4?
You got no Miami, no Florida State, no Clemson. That's not bad.
Yeah. And you get SMU at home. You got to go to Louisville.
That's the last game of the year, I think, for them, SMU.
You also get, like I said, you get to play San Diego State. You get to play Stanford. North Carolina, Duke, and UVA got to come across the country. Virginia Tech is, who knows the dumpster fire they may be the rest of the year. Even I mean, they could get the 7-5 or something. They have that young freshman quarterback who, if if things go by the wayside and Wilcox is fired, or if they decide 6-6 isn't enough because Ron Rivera is the GM, that quarterback who was originally supposed to go to Oregon and then with some shuffling around ends up at Cal, Duran Q
Sagapalitele.
That is a heck of a pronunciation by you there. That's impressive. It's like, I guess it's like Tagovailoa. We're going to have to learn it because he looks very good. Schools, teams will get tape. Let's see how it plays out, but he looks like the real deal. I guess I'm going to maybe lean Narduzzi just because Elliott and Wilcox like they can do enough to hold on at this point. Yeah. Elliott feels the more vulnerable maybe of the two, but I mean, it's all three of them obviously still. Elliott and Wilcox are very vulnerable, in general, but I think both of them are trending better. And Narduzzi, it might be Tech that's the only one, unless we see a coach take another job elsewhere. Yeah, unless someone leaves. Like, would Mike Norvell?
It has to be Narduzzi.
Like, would Mike Norvell? He's got a massive buyout, and whatnot. But would he consider a lateral move just to, reset? After a great year at Florida State, I don't think he should. I think he's reminded people of Florida State, hey, calm down.
Well, that's a good segue to the other question I always ask: what coach with a good season is the most likely to get a bigger job somewhere else?
I mean, Norvell could definitely.
I might say Fran Brown for that one.
And there's other factors there too.
Mine. Yeah.
Who? Well, yeah, but I will say, if Syracuse gets like the 6-6, Fran Brown's going to be an SEC job, should be, because that schedule is nightmare. Like, I mean, that is just a middle finger. That schedule is a middle finger to Syracuse because they played Tennessee to start. Tough. They got to go to Clemson. They got Duke. They got at SMU. They got at Georgia Tech, at Miami, at Notre Dame. I mean, holy cow! Who did they anger in the ACC offices? And they put Tennessee and Notre Dame on the schedule. I mean, jeez. But if they go like 500 somehow, teams should be flocking to find any.
After winning 10 last year in year one. Yeah.
Like, if you're Florida, you should be flocking. If you're Arkansas, if you're Ole Miss, like, you should be flocking up there.
I will say, this is a piece. We talked about if Shane Beamer would take the Virginia Tech job, I would take Fran Brown at South Carolina.
It could definitely be something like that. Yeah, you could definitely see that. I know this is not a head coach, but Shannon Dawson. I mean, because he's been at Houston, he's been all over the country. I mean, say Cincinnati opens up if Satterfield things don't go well there. Oklahoma State, he could be a guy that's in play there. Or if there's some other guys, that end up Big 12 jobs open because someone else got a bigger job.
What if Jason Candle would take the Cincinnati job? You had mentioned him before.
It's maybe who they should have gone with in the first place. Yeah. But or if SMU's have another great defensive year, Scott Simon's there. Say Jeff Traylor gets Arkansas or Oklahoma State or something. Scott Simons could just go over to UTSA, or say GJ Kinney gets a bigger job, or Eric Morris, or whoever. Like. Or one of those Texas jobs opens, or another job in that region, like Scott Simons, the
other Simons one could be. I mean, I think this one would be more realistic for Simons. You would mention Ryan Silverfield before. If he would get another job, Simons was a former Memphis assistant. He could be that guy.
Yeah, that definitely. That's definitely. So it might be, or like Garrett Riley. Clemson gets their offensive things figured out, and Garrett Riley, or say Chadwell and Liberty. Chadwell just decides to make another move because the opportunity pops up. That doesn't seem likely, but Tom Allen at Clemson, D.C. was very much considered for Liberty, was interested in that while he was still the Indiana head coach.
That. Okay.
Yeah. So could that be? That's a stretch probably there, but Tom Allen could look at a G5 job if that opens, a good G5, opportunity opens. He could be a guy that maybe makes a move or something just to get back to being a head coach if he wants that. Yeah. So he probably would be content to just make $2 million as a Clemson DC, but
a lot less stress doing that. Yeah.
So it's interesting to see, I think it's more on the coordinator side than necessarily coaches moving around. But like I said, a Fran Brown, unless maybe say a Dave Doran can, him and NC State kind of have this weird thing. If the right job were to open and Doran has a solid year, reset.
I wonder, and for him, before he went to NIU, D coordinator at Wisconsin, if things would go bad for Fickell, I wouldn't mind Dave Doran at Wisconsin if I was them.
If they have like a 8-4, 9-3 year, yeah, he could definitely. And he's tried to position himself plenty of times before in some of these searches.
He has.
He definitely, I think, would. I don't know how viable he would be. He might be more a lateral move than an upgrade, but
I think
it could be. I don't think that'll happen, and I think NC State and Doran need to realize they're pretty good for each other.
They are.
Of course, if he goes like 6-6 this year, then it could be over for Doran, because it does seem like there's a short leash, because NC State has very high ambitions, which I give them credit that they have the fan support to do it. I don't know if it matches the reality fully sometimes, but
fair.
Hey, I respect it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, glad to have you, Tim. This was a fantastic episode. I love nerding out about all the head coaching stuff. It was great. But I will, you can see Tim's info down here at the bottom on the banner. I will also tag him in all of that. And Tim, thank you for being here. It was a fantastic episode. I hope we can collaborate again in the future.
Mike, I absolutely appreciate it. Yeah, we'll have to try to see if we can collaborate again. There's plenty to be discussed.
Definitely. Thanks, everybody.